As WikiLeaks shockwaves continue to reverberate around the globe, questions continue to be raised. Are they a danger to us all? Or are they just telling the truth about our leaders and ourselves? Are they enemies of the state or a new form of journalism our society desperately needs? WikiLeaks, a debate about secrecy, security and freedom of speech. This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm James Bays. Welcome to the programme. Julian Assange and his whistleblowing site WikiLeaks continue to make headlines, with daily revelations continuing even though Mr. Assange himself is now behind bars. Is he a hero or a villain? Can he be held legally accountable? Are the revelations on his site endangering lives? Or are they simply embarrassing for the US government? And what of freedom of expression? Inside Story will be dealing with all these issues and more in a series of programmes over the coming week. Let's begin with the fundamental issue of freedom of speech and information, as some governments consider taking legal action against WikiLeaks. If you try to access that site right now, you'll find it difficult, if not impossible. For instance, if you were to type www.wikileaks.com or .org, you'll either see this or get an error message. However, the site can still be accessed on a number of different addresses or by using this not very memorable numeric IP address. With us on the show today to discuss all of the issues surrounding WikiLeaks, from London, Charlie Wolfe, a political commentator; from Brussels, Ernest Sagaga, Human Rights and Information Officer at the International Federation of Journalists; and here in Doha, we've got Kawa Qureshi, international law specialist. Let's start with you, Mr. Wolfe. How do you see WikiLeaks? A journalistic organisation using their legitimate right to freedom of speech?
No, not at all. I'm sorry, I disagree. And it's interesting, I was talking to a good friend of mine earlier this week, a long-standing foreign correspondent formerly with CBS News, and he felt the same way. To me, investigative journalism is if you find an issue where wrongdoing or malfeasance is going on and you bring it to the public, then yes, you're checking your sources, then yes, that's investigative journalism. What Mr. Assange is doing is he's taken stolen goods and he's disseminated them around the world without any sort of fear or understanding of what the consequences may be, either to the diplomacy itself, reputation of the United States, which wasn't that badly harmed, to tell you the truth, but the further consequences of human rights activists that are working with the United States, journalists that are working with the United States in countries that aren't so friendly and aren't so democratic, whose lives will be put in danger. So I think we need to understand the differences between the two. It's very easy to sort of hide behind the notion of free speech or the notion of transparency, of some sort of utopian ideals, but unfortunately I think he deludes himself.
But journalists, don't they often trade in leaked information, Ernest Sagaga? This is not unusual for journalists to get leaks of people.
I mean, that's right. If I might say, from our point of view, that's true. WikiLeaks is not a media organization. We don't call it a media organization. And that is why we welcomed their decision to entrust this information to a reputable media organization where colleagues will be mindful of their responsibility towards the public and the people involved. So we take no position to the justification of the revelation from WikiLeaks, but we welcome their decision to go to media professionals who will be able to process information in a professional manner. But there is also a wider point here, and that is to do with the whistleblowing. We believe that whistleblowing can actually help open democracy, and to the extent that what WikiLeaks has revealed may help in that regard, we believe that they've got the right to be able to put out that information. So we support whistleblowers, and in this case, we believe that WikiLeaks should also have that right if they serve the public interest.
Now, Mr. Qureshi, you're a lawyer. We get lots of different opinions from any lawyer we speak to, but we want your legal opinion on this discussion. Do you see WikiLeaks as a media journalist organisation?
Well, there are two competing points that have been raised. The first is the importance of allowing diplomatic communications to be undertaken with the safety of confidentiality, the damage that's caused to diplomatic relations when that confidential cordon is breached, and the position of journalists, which is that their job is to ensure that the public interest is promoted and to expose wrongdoing. so far, what we've seen in terms of the documents that have been published by the newspapers, and also, insofar as I'm aware, on the WikiLeaks website, there's nothing there that suggests that there's any compelling public interest for people to know that, for example, Leader A thinks badly of Leader B, so on and so forth. And therefore, in that context, there are going to be many people who say, well, there's no public interest being served at the moment because the material is embarrassing. It's a different matter where the material that is leaked or disseminated in the public domain might show commission of a criminal offence, like torture, for example.
OK, Charlie Wolff, on that issue of whistleblowing, surely that is one function of journalism, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. And if there was something specific that Mr. Assange had found out, if he had uncovered, for instance, the Abu Ghraib situation or the My Lai massacre, or you look back, speaking of Vietnam, what Daniel Ellsberg did, then one could say, yes, all he has done is he's been given a cache of information because of the digital age we live in that allows someone like a private first-class Bradley Manning, who is the man alleged to have taken all this material, to just give him a dump load of information, which he's now passed on to the world, I think for the purposes of embarrassment to the United States and towards a political agenda. I mean, that's my view.
But the world has been writing news stories from this every single day. Allegations of widespread corruption in Afghanistan, concerns about Pakistan's nuclear program, Saudi Arabia allegedly wanting Iran bombed. Aren't they these news stories that should be covered?
No, not really. Most of what they've been writing has been stuff that we've either already figured out for ourselves or had a pretty much good understanding of. I don't see some sort of a major public interest of whistleblowing. You know, again, he was just by fortune came into these papers or these documents, and he's now dumping them onto the world without any sort of consideration for the consequences. You know, look, for instance, at the situation in the Gulf. Now, many of us have already known, you don't need to, you know, be a brain surgeon to figure out that Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, etc., are very nervous about Iran wanting to move towards nuclearization. But to broadcast that to the world has now put those countries in a very difficult diplomatic situation. And when you have people working quietly in the background in the work of diplomacy, they do need that sort of confidentiality. Look at the situation with North Korea and China. If China had any sort of desires to pull out as far as North Korea is concerned, that's now all dashed.
OK, Mr. Sagaga, do you think that this is just embarrassing information, or do you think this is irresponsible?
I'm sure some aspects of what has been revealed will be embarrassing to people involved. But as I understand, there are thousands of documents, and I'm not sure that we have gone through all of them. So maybe there are still more to come, and which we have some kind of public interest nature. But can I go back to what my colleague from London has said? There was a time when open diplomacy was actually the order of the day. You will remember former U.S. wartime President Woodrow Wilson, who was advocating open covenants, openly arrived at. Maybe Mr. Assange is trying to get us back to that situation.
Well, let's look at the issue of freedom of speech. Yeah, Charlie Wolff, guess quickly, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily Mr. Assange's place, and I don't think that that was his intent. I think, to be cruel and brutal about it, I think he's a bit of an egoist. You know, this is a man who recently, there was infighting, I believe, amongst his own people, and said, "Can't you leave me alone? Don't you realize I'm trying to stop 2 wars?" I don't remember electing Mr. Assange to any post within the United States government. I don't think he, as an Australian, has the right to dictate my country's foreign policy.
But surely he has a right to freedom of speech. Article 19 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers." Article 11 of the European Union's Charter of Fundamental Rights echoes similar sentiments and adds, "The freedom and pluralism of the media shall be respected." And Mr. Wolff, your own constitution, the First Amendment, among other things, says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press. Sorry to quote all of that back to you, but he's allowed to do this, isn't he?
I know it all, and I fully support it. I'm someone who's a commentator. Mr. Assange is more than free to voice his opinions about the United States, good, bad, or indifference. But what he's not allowed to do is to take private, confidential material and disseminate that to the world. No more than if I got my hands on your medical records, that I should be able to sit here and start broadcasting that over Al Jazeera's airwaves, or what your ratings may be, or what memos of people in the office may think about whether you do a good program or not, if I found it on someone's desk while trawling through the building.
But as a journalist, and I am a journalist, and when I'm not sitting behind this desk, I do travel around the world, our job is to shine a light into dark corners of the world. Isn't this legitimate? He's found this information. He didn't actually write any of this himself. He was given it. It's passed it on to journalistic organisations, and they've put it out there in the public domain. It's a leak like any other leak. It's just a massive one, isn't it?
No, I think that, again, I go back to what I believe it was Mr. Qureshi was saying about you have to weigh it against a public interest. If there was a true public interest, if he had found a certain story, then yes, I would think the man a hero myself. It was a whistleblower that uncovered Abu Ghraib. It was a whistleblower, if I remember correctly, that uncovered the My Lai massacre. Whistleblowers are very honorable people that put their lives at risk. I don't see Mr. Assange doing that. I think he, by fortune, our misfortune, his good fortune, came into papers that weren't his, and again, without any sort of consideration, just decided to throw it out to the world and see what happens. Well, there are consequences to these things, and states do have the right to protect their property and their assets and their foreign policy, just as you have the right to protect your medical records, or I have the right to protect, comments I may make to friends about my wife in an off moment, or private conversations. I think the two have to be balanced, one against the other.
You say there are consequences, Mr. Qureshi. Are there actually any legal avenues open to governments, particularly the US government?
Well, the discussion that's taking place so far is about freedom of information, not so much freedom of expression, freedom of information, and the interests of national security, ensuring that there is no act which endangers lives. So far as the US is concerned, we understand from the US Attorney General that he's considering whether or not the espionage laws of the United States might apply to Mr. Assange. Those espionage laws are essentially related to questions concerning nationality and or crimes committed on US soil. The difficulty that may face the US authorities is that Mr. Assange may be able to argue, one, he's not a US national, two, no act or omission that might constitute a crime under those statutes took place on US soil, certainly not so far as he's concerned. And last but by no means least, there is the matter of him not being in the US jurisdiction. He is presently in the UK. He may, or inevitably, some will say, he's most likely to go to Sweden sooner or later. And from there may be a suggestion that he should be brought from Sweden to the US, but that will depend upon the extradition relationships. And he will no doubt say that if there's an attempt to extradite him from Sweden to the US for espionage-related matters, there is no jurisdiction, and or any such request is politically motivated, and that will end up in the European Court of Human Rights.
Now, we have to obviously point out that he is behind bars at the moment, but nothing to do with WikiLeaks. This is to do with charges of rape in Sweden. But, Mr. Sagaga, if there were espionage charges, what would be the position of your federation on that?
Again, as I said before, we do not believe Mr. Assange is a journalist. He is, as you said, exercising his right to freedom of expression. And I don't think that we will have any position in the future, as we do not have a position even now as to the justification of what he has done. But what is happening is, as a whistleblower, what is worrying us in that regard is that, as we understand, there was an inquiry opened in Sweden a few months ago. It was dropped, and again it was now reopened recently, and we are keen to see that the process is as impartial and neutral as possible, so that we do not have any impression or give any impression that he's being actually prosecuted for what he has done in Europe, which is not a crime as far as I know, under the disguise of what he has done of a criminal nature in Sweden.
Well, this is certainly exciting a lot of interest in the United States. The former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin says that Assange is an anti-American operative with blood on his hands. Now let's just listen to the comment of the star presenter of Fox News, Bill O'Reilly.
Whoever leaked all those State Department documents to the WikiLeaks website is a traitor and should be executed or put in prison for life. As you may know, classified information is now floating around the globe, courtesy of the traitors and this despicable website, which is based in Sweden.
Mr. Wolf, he should be executed. He's a traitor. What do you think of that?
Well, actually, Bill O'Reilly was referring to Bradley Manning, I think, at that point, as the person who actually did do a treasonable act, or I think something that could be considered a treasonable act, though you did say, hear him also say, or put in jail for the rest of his life. So it is open to the courts for that. As far as Mr. Assange is concerned, yes, it's a very murky area. This is, I guess, part of the new world we live in. You have someone who essentially is working against the interests of the United States, who is a non-state actor, who isn't even a group. It's no longer, you even need to be an Al-Qaeda to have a network. And I'm not saying he's necessarily a terrorist, but you know, in the sense that you don't even need to be hiding in a cave with a network of people. You can sit there with a laptop from anywhere in the world. So there is a balance of the law, and also ultimately for states, be it the United States or the United Kingdom where I am here, where Mr. Assange is, to protect themselves. I mean, that is, again, if you think back to the UN Charter, states have a right to protect themselves, and that includes their assets and their information. So I think one thing also, though, obviously, a lot of people have been quoting Sarah Palin and Mike Huckabee and Bill O'Reilly, and then certain senators. I know Peter Hickstra and also Peter King on the Intelligence Committee have seen him as an enemy to the United States. That is not, though, remember, American policy. It will be handled, if Mr. Assange should be extradited to the States, will be handled by an independent judiciary system. He will have every single legal right that anybody else would have. So I think we're jumping a little bit too quick to taking offhanded remarks made by politicians. They're not
well,
US
when we hear
policy.
phrases like enemy combatant, we think of things like Guantanamo, and there was no legal process there.
Well, there is a legal process there. The problem with Guantanamo is obviously it's a new legal process. We had for pretty much the first time people acting, again, as non-state actors and committing acts of terrorism in the United States. So this is the new world we live in. This is the world where, for instance, Mr. Assange talks quite a lot about freedom of expression. And meanwhile, if someone like Sarah Palin makes comments on her Facebook that disagree with what he believes, however strong you may think they are, agree or disagree, we now find Mr. Assange's, I'll use the word backers, obviously they're not necessarily connected to him, but his fans, if you will, creating cyber war on her website, trying to shut it down and release her private personal credit card information, trying to shut down Visa, MasterCard and PayPal and Amazon. So I wonder, is this the new utopian world that Mr. Assange is bringing to us?
Well, you talk about the new world we live in. Mr. Qureshi, we are rather in uncharted territory here, aren't we?
Not really, actually. There is a distinction which perhaps we have to draw. What Mr. Assange and people like him are providing the rest of us with access to is the truth, however unpalatable and unvarnished it may be, albeit its assessments being made by individuals in different missions all over the world. And so we need to make a distinction between whatever he may or may not be doing and the remarks which are undoubtedly uncalled for on the part of many. And Charlie has not said that, but in so many words is accepting that they're certainly not consistent with what one would expect from the due process that the US otherwise would provide for. And it's not uncharted territory because the US was the champion of freedom of information. So much information has been revealed in the public domain as a result of freedom of information legislation. In the United Kingdom, forgive me when I say our own country, in the United Kingdom, in 2000, Freedom of Information Act was enacted, and it's as a result of that Freedom of Information Act and the use of the Freedom of Information Act by newspapers and NGOs that information came into the public domain about the Iraq War, the second Iraq War of 2003, and the so-called dodgy dossier, and the way in which information had been edited, redacted, and put before the Cabinet for the Cabinet to approve the going to war. Freedom of information is vitally important. There are some who are questioning whether, as a result of this recent incident, there will be a tightening of the legislative framework in jurisdictions like the UK and the US, so that ultimately there will be less freedom of information. And so far as freedom of speech is concerned, plainly freedom of speech depends upon ideas, it depends upon material. And if there's less material, then there's a knock-on effect so far as freedom of speech is concerned.
Of course, Mr. Assange is not doing this on his own with WikiLeaks. He has media partners. He has major newspapers around the world. Mr. Sagaga, big issues for media companies here.
Actually, it's first of all, before we get to the media organization, there is someone who is passing on information to Mr. Assange. So there is someone who is leaking the information from within the administration in America. So media, of course, are receiving this information. And as I said, we are happy and glad that the people who are receiving this information are professionals. They know exactly how to handle this kind of information. They know their responsibilities to the public and to people involved. And therefore, we should be, I think, reassured that there will be no, there will be no damage intentionally done to public or people involved in these revelations.
So, Mr. Wolff, do you think the media have been good brokers in taking this information from WikiLeaks and passing it to the public?
Yes and no. I mean, so far we haven't seen anything of great importance come out. What worries me, though, is I'm not sure if these are the proper gatekeepers, especially when we are, in a sense, in a time of war. And there are many important implications to information that's being released. I don't think this is necessary. I think it was Mr. Qureshi talked about the truth is being presented here. Well, it's not U.S. policy. So a U.S. ambassador, our ambassador here in London, thought that Mr. Cameron, the Prime Minister, was a bit of a lightweight, I think one of the cables said. Well, that's just one ambassador's view. That's not U.S. policy. That's something that goes back to Washington, is digested with a lot of other information. So a lot of it's out of context. For instance, on the first day of the leaks, The Guardian, who is the media partner here, had something, I think the headline read something to the effect of 250,000 cables expose U.S. view of the rest of the world, which was totally wrong. It exposes the views of individuals giving assessments to their government or taking information that they've had from private conversations and passing it on to their government, from which policy is then derived. So, for instance, the ambassador here thought David Cameron was a bit of a lightweight. I saw the ambassador the other day, and without going into a private conversation myself and leaking too much, he said, our relationship is very strong and very good, and people understand that's what diplomacy is all about.
Well, Charlie, we wouldn't want you to leak any more of your private conversation with the ambassador. Thank you to our guests, Charlie Wolff in London, Ernest Sagaga in Brussels, and Kawa Qureshi in Doha. And thank you so much, our viewers, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We'll continue to discuss WikiLeaks for the next few days, so please send us your comments and suggestions. Email them to us here at InsideStory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.